tell me the answer to the second problem? Nearly everyone raised their hand. I did not. It had been nearly 3 weeks since my sister went missing. We were both part of our school's soccer team, but one day, after practice, she just disappeared. I didn't see when it happened or how it happened. All I know is that when my mom went to pick us up, she could only find one of us. We asked the coach if he had seen her, but he did not. He said he would contact the school and look around. My mom didn't want to leave without her, so we were there for hours. Eventually, he just advised us to go home and said that the police would be called to conduct an investigation. After a week, I quit the team. I couldn't play a sport that my sister and I held near and dear to our hearts if I didn't know where she was. Jack, what's 2/4 plus 3/6? 16? The entire class started laughing. I saw my teacher with her face in her palm, and quite frankly, I was embarrassed. I was never a good student, but I had never been able to focus ever since my sister went missing. She was a great student, the best in the class. She would have raised her hand, and I know she would have gotten the answer right. But she was gone now, and the whole class knew it. The teachers knew it too. All of our teachers were informed of her disappearance. The day after she went missing, all of my teachers tried to comfort me, but every day after that, class resumed as if she never existed. Her name had never been brought up from that day forward. As for my classmates, well, they all ignored her absence. Her friends asked me of her whereabouts on the day after she went missing, but they just seemed to forget about her afterwards. Alright, children, class dismissed. Jack, I want to speak to you after class. As a large group of children exited the dimly lit room, mocking me and laughing at me, I sulked down in my chair as the teacher approached me. Jack, I want to talk about your academic performance as of late. Your grades have been in a steady decline, and you just don't seem motivated to participate in class. Is there something going on? I guess I just haven't been feeling like myself ever since Faye, went missing. Well, don't worry. I'm sure she'll be back soon, one way or another, she assured me. What was that? Nothing. I didn't say anything. She stumbled with her words, and it was clear that she was nervous about something. You may leave now. I'm sorry, I don't understand. You may leave now. I had never been this close to her, and something about her frightened me. There was a sternness in her voice. Her eyes were cold and harsh, as if someone had taken away her innocence. Her arms were frail and shook with instability. She was relatively young, but her pale face reeked of fine lines. You may leave now. The hallway was full of bright faces, full of children laughing and speaking to one another as if they would any other day. I took a deep breath and prepared to walk down the center of the hall. There was a long, painful silence, broken only by my heavy footsteps. All eyes were on me as I shakily limped down the hall. For weeks none of them had spoken to me. With their face devoid of any expression, they stared. They always stare. Before I walked out the door, I caught a glimpse of the soccer coach speaking to the principal. He gave me a wink and smiled as I turned my head to leave the school, but before I was gone for good, I was morbidly disturbed by something he told the principal. Don't worry, sir, he's next. My mom was waiting outside in the car. She smiled and asked me how my day was, but I didn't say anything. She could sense that I was still distressed over my sister's disappearance, as she sensed it for weeks. I saw through her artificial smile. On the day my sister went missing, my parents were absolutely devastated. I had woken up the next day to the sound of sobbing and teardrops hitting the floor in the other room. 3 weeks later, I knew my mom still had not recovered. None of us had. During the entirety of the car ride home, there was a long, painful silence. I entered my bedroom and took a seat on the bed. I took a glance at the calendar. It was Wednesday. On the other side of my room, my sister's bed was neat and orderly, just as she had left it. I crept towards it and slowly drove my fingers against its surface. Dust. I woke up to the sound of teardrops trickling on my window. Luckily, it hadn't rained hard, so the car ride to school was manageable. As I exited the car, I caught a glimpse of a poster that was taped onto a street lamp. A still frame of my sister's face that smiled at me for weeks now, pouring off of the paper. The bold red words, "Missing Child," were viscously moving down the page like blood. Another poster was taped to the pole, but it had faded, and I could not make out the face. A third poster was taped underneath it, and another one at that, and even more so, a few more. But all of the pages had given into time. It had been time for recess. I kicked a worn-out soccer ball by myself in the darkest, outermost part of the schoolyard. The ground was still wet, and the sun was out. Its light had reflected off of everyone's faces, but could not reach the outskirts of the play area. I asked to use the bathroom and stepped inside the school. The hallway lights flickered, rapidly. then returned to normal. They had been flickering like that for weeks, although more unpredictably each day. As I closed the bathroom door, I saw their soccer coach walking towards the staircase that led to the basement. The basement was restricted to students, and if we were caught even remotely near the entrance to the staircase, we would be disciplined. I thought about what I had heard him say to the principal the day prior, that I was next. Next for what? As he walked through the empty door frame, I was about to walk back to the schoolyard, but I had noticed something that freaked me out. In his back pocket, my sister's hair bow, the same one she wore on the day she went missing. I wanted to trail behind him, but I knew that any efforts I made to do so would be futile. No, I needed to wait for the right moment to do so. All the faculty members had one, but I just couldn't decide on who I would be stealing it from. "What are you doing out here? Go outside, now!" I had forgotten that the hallway monitor was on duty at this time. I felt defeated. I needed to get into the basement somehow, but there was no way I could get a key from one of the faculty. As I was returning to the schoolyard, a thought hit me. 2 months ago, my sister told me that her friend went missing. I don't really remember much about her friend, but she was part of the student government. Somehow, during a meeting with one of the assistant principals, she managed to snatch their keychain. My sister told me that her friend was always suspicious of the faculty and their obsession over concealing the basement. One day, she gave my sister the keychain and told her to stay alert. She said something about the faculty's next target. The day after, she went missing and was never found. What was that girl's name again? We pledged never to tell anyone about the keychain. I'll keep it in my deepest compartment of my bedside drawer. Her words never left my memory. I was growing extremely anxious. I needed to go home and find that keychain. I was getting so caught up in devising my plan that I forgot that there were still 3 hours before I could return home. And even if I managed to retrieve the keychain, when would I have the chance to reach the staircase without the hall monitor or a faculty member seeing me? The lights flickered one more time before I stepped out into the open world. I had never been more anxious on a car ride in my entire life. When I got home, I bolted up the stairs and into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I paced myself over to my sister's bedside drawer. I became more nervous with each step. I was sweating now. I opened the drawer and gently wrestled through my sister's belongings, so as to not disrupt the order she had built. I reached into the deepest compartment of the drawer and pulled out the keychain. The light from the only bulb in the room reflected off the largest key on the chain. I knew it was the key to the basement. I clutched the chain and held it close to my chest. Then I placed it back in the drawer and closed it. The wind was screaming. I could hear it through the closed windows. I opened them and the wind hit me with a supernatural force that knocked me down to the floor. I looked out the window once more. The dark clouds were rolling in once more, but the sun fought back. It desperately shone through the gray skies, but its light failed to reach me. "Happy birthday, honey!" I looked at my alarm clock, which for days had failed to wake me up each day. It was 6:15 a.m., and my dad would typically be leaving for work. Today, my parents were sitting at the edge of my bed. They were smiling at me as I begrudgingly sat up. "Thanks," I disorientedly hugged them. I looked at their faces once more, and they were still smiling, but they were clearly ingenuine, and I understood why. It was my birthday, but it was also my sister's birthday. We were all emotionally distraught. "Anyways, I better go. See you later, champ. Have a great day at school." My dad's voice cracked. He proceeded to leave the room. "I know it's early. You can go back to sleep for now. I'll wake you up at 7. Or maybe your alarm clock will," she chuckled, but quickly stopped herself. She gave me a kiss on the forehead and left. I attempted to go back to sleep. I woke up to the sound of thunder crashing down on the outside of my house. Thoroughly startled, I opened the windows and looked outside. The ominous near-black clouds loomed over me and prepared to unleash their wrath on the ground beneath them. The air smelled of mist, and the wind spoke only in whispers. It was evident the sun lost its battle, but then I remembered mine. Before I left for school that morning, I remembered the keychain. I placed it in the pocket of my hoodie and braced myself. It seemed as if an umbrella would break under the might of the heavy rain, but mine held firm. Upon exiting the car, I took a moment to examine the many posters that were taped onto the street lamp. I frantically searched for the one bearing my sister's trapped face, to greet her. When I found it, I noticed that her picture had almost faded away completely, but I was still able to recognize her. The phrase, "missing child," had nearly faded away as well, but had imprinted itself on the paper, forever. I wanted to take the poster with me, but it was really wet. I feared that if I even laid a finger on it, it would rip. So I simply made note of its location and left it alone, as to not ruin her memory. As I sat down by myself in advisement, I realized that I still had not figured out how I would be able to reach the basement staircase at all. What, with all the hallways being guarded by the hall monitors? Just then, the morning announcements came on. And as an announcement for students and faculty, today's thunderstorm has brought with it a lightning strike that has damaged our main power supply. We will be utilizing a reserve power supply, but today all of the lights in the building will be turned off to conserve electricity. Flashlights and battery-operated lamps will be provided to faculty members. Thank you, and have a happy Friday. My school was an old building, like really old, built nearly a century ago old. The aging power generator had already been damaged, which caused the lights to flicker every now and then. But now the lights were gone for good. At least for today. I knew that this would be my only chance to reach the basement. I just had to wait for the right time to strike. As I left the room for my first class, I noticed how dark the hallways were. I think I could barely make out a silhouette that was 10 feet ahead of me. The hall monitor seemed to have amassed a temporary team. I could make out figures with a bright orange sash waving their flashlights to imperfectly guide people through the hallways. I decided to reach the basement staircase. I needed to move during the passing time right before lunch, when the entire school's worth of students would keep the hall monitors distracted. The sound of footsteps echoed off the confined walls of the hallway. Words bounced off the ceiling. One would not be able to distinguish the ongoing thunder outside from the mixed chants of the students inside. But the noise, in addition to the mass amounts of students moving through the halls, gave me ample time to quickly sneak through the crowd and reach the basement staircase. I was about to enter the staircase when one of the flashlights grazed over it. I was maybe a few inches away from getting caught. Nevertheless, I made my way down the staircase. It was winding and extremely long. Unlike the hallways, I could hear each of my own footsteps echo very clearly. It must have taken me around 5 minutes to make it all the way to the basement door. Only a single light bulb above allowed me to see the door itself. Upon first glance, it looked like a standard plain wooden door, one that was akin to the many wooden doors of the rooms on the surface. The only exception appeared to be the lack of window. I took a glance behind me. I no longer heard thunder. I no longer heard anyone or anything. My hand was shaking. I unzipped the pocket of my hoodie and took out the keychain. I identified the keyhole on the doorknob and carefully stuck the largest key in. It fit. It turned. The door opened, ever so slowly. Just then, I heard something. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps trailed just above me, getting louder and louder. Someone was coming down, and they were coming down fast. I panicked and stepped inside. I closed the door behind me and turned around to see a giant chamber. A chamber that, oddly enough, was lit up perfectly. The bountiful lantern struck every area with light. Every area except the far outskirts of the basement was lit. For once, I was glad to be hard to spot. There were so many faculty members here, as well as people I had never seen before. It was also extremely loud, which was odd as I heard nothing of the sort from the other side of the door. Miraculously, no one saw me or heard me come in, so I was safe. At least for now. 2 people were walking in my direction. I ducked behind a pile of boxes and continued to examine my surroundings. I struggled to find out the purpose of this place. Perhaps it was just used for storage? As the 2 people passed by, I noticed that a box to my right was labeled. New, handcuffs. I mouthed the words. I looked at another larger box behind it. New, rope. I was still confused. What did a school need handcuffs and rope for? I assumed that these would be for our lone security guard, who remained sedentary in front of the main entrance every day. But then I looked at another box near my foot. It was thinner and longer than the other boxes in my vicinity. New, whip. I didn't know what to think at this point. What did anyone need a whip for? Just then, I saw my former soccer coach open the door. From behind the boxes, I could hear his conversation with the 2 people who had just passed by me. So, the lights are out today, Jim? One of the 2 identified people asked the soccer coach. Yeah, it's been chaos up there. Had to push my way through a stampede, the soccer coach chuckled. Anyways, how were this week's sales, Emil? The other unknown man spoke up. Well, Leia made $500 off of one customer. Leia. That name sounded familiar. Did he give any feedback? The soccer coach asked. He said she was amazing. The best one he's ever had. Definitely a returning customer. But he did break the whip we loaned him. Darn. At least we have plenty in reserve. What else is new? Clarice made $600. Thomas made $450. Clarice, Thomas, again. Those names sounded familiar, but I just couldn't figure out where I've heard those names before. Sounds like a good turnout. What about Faye? My heart skipped a beat as I heard my sister's name. I continued to listen. Ah, the newbie. She never fails to disappoint. Made $1,000 off of one customer. The most money made this entire week. I gotta ask, Jim, where did you find someone as valuable as her? She was actually on the soccer team. I got to know her pretty well over the last few months. One day, I divided the team up into groups to do some drills and asked her to follow me out to the back. I told her that she looked thirsty and gave her a water bottle. Did it have the pill in it? Emil sounded enthusiastic, but I couldn't help but feel like throwing up. Of course! She was out in a matter of seconds, and I brought her down here. Well, she was a great choice. The customers have been loving their sessions with her. Do you think you can get another one like her? I was actually planning on grabbing her twin brother as well, but he quit the team, and I haven't been able to find an opportunity to be alone with him. I couldn't do it today because of all the commotion with the lights being out and everything. I felt sick. I was sweating. I was nauseous. I wanted to know what the hell they were doing with my sister, what they were making her do. I wanted to know what they were going to make me do. I wanted to know what they were making all of those kids do. Jim, are we going to send off another batch soon? Yes, but for now at least, we're going to keep Faye here. Principal declares her to be too valuable to sell off to some other joint. Right now, we're the most powerful joint in town, and she helped us get there. As for the others, well, they'll be sent off soon. It's been months since they've started working in the business. Any memory of their disappearance must have been gone by now. We'll get in contact with some other joints in the next week or so. For a moment, I remained confused, trying to put the pieces together. I was sweating now. I was panicking so much that I couldn't notice that my breathing was getting louder. Then I figured it out. I could never believe in a million years, but it appeared to be reality. My school was the center of an underground trafficking ring, and my sister was its prime moneymaker. Actually, Ron, where is Faye? My soccer coach asked the first unidentified man. She's seeing the medic. The last session she had was pretty interesting. Ron began to scratch the back of his head. She started screaming a lot. As you know, she rarely ever screams during appointments. In fact, that's why she makes so much money. The screaming can be a real turnoff for people, you know. The soccer coach put his palm on his forehead. I hope she wasn't whipped too hard. I know we have whips in the reserve, but I think the principal would prefer it if they weren't broken every day or so. Can you two take me to see her? The three men walked over to what I believed was the medical station. From behind what seemed like a never-ending pile of boxes filled with sex props, I followed them. I managed to see into the window of the medical station through a crack between the two boxes. My vision was limited, but I saw a girl sitting on the medical table. She wore only a short robe that went down to her knees, and I was horrified when I saw her legs. They were tattered up, littered with cuts, and bruised. Her left leg was stained with blood. Then I took a glance at her face. It was similarly filled with cuts and bruises. I was able to see the outline of her cheekbones. Her blonde hair was noticeably stained, but she was wearing the same hair bow that the soccer coach had in his pocket yesterday. This was not the same girl I had grown up with. It couldn't possibly be her. The three men brought her outside in front of the window to talk to her. Good afternoon, Faye. I see that you're wearing the present I got for you yesterday. You did such a great job with that last customer, right? The soccer coach put his arm on her shoulder. She said nothing. What's wrong? Why'd you scream during the appointment? Are you trying to jeopardize us? Again, she said nothing. She didn't even look up at him. Her lifeless figure stood gazing at the floor. Frustrated, the soccer coach shook her violently. She finally looked up at him. Listen here, if you ever ruin another opportunity like that again, I will personally guarantee that you'll be screaming for a very different reason. He took a small item out of his pocket. It was a pocket knife. Go figure. He shook it vigorously near her throat. That's enough, Jim. She slipped up once. I'm sure she can fix herself. Or else. Emil pulled the soccer coach away from my sister. Right, Faye? Yes, sir. At last, my sister had spoken. I wanted to reach out and pull my sister in here with me and make a break for the staircase, but I knew that was impossible. My sister was now right in front of me. I hadn't been this close to her in weeks, and something about her frightened me. Ron took her arm and prepared to take her away. I didn't know where they were going, but I knew that there wouldn't be any boxes ahead to hide behind. I was stuck. There was nowhere to go. I knelt down there, helplessly watching my sister's breathing corpse being dragged to who knows where. For a moment, our eyes made contact, but I couldn't do anything to help her. I couldn't do anything to save her. I don't know if she even could recognize me. Hey, buddy, you're not supposed to be down here, you know that? A man who I didn't know grabbed me and pulled me close to him. I was in a chokehold, and we struggled for a bit. I tried my best to escape and push him around. The boxes that concealed my position were promptly knocked over for everyone to see and hear. Listen, kid, just keep still. It'll be over in a few minutes. He liberated one of his arms and tried to take something out of his back pocket. Seizing the opportunity, I broke free and ran for the staircase. At this point, I had no time to fight the man. People had noticed what was going on and were now running in my direction. I needed to escape before I was caught for good. My heart was beating, and I wanted to throw up more than I already had wanted to. I took a quick look behind me. The man who I had been struggling with was now sprinting about 30 feet behind me, along with two other men, one of which being the soccer coach. "Jack!" the coach yelled at me, diverting the attention of more people in the basement. At this point, I was merely inches away from the door. I unlocked the door quickly, but it was extremely heavy. Pulling it open was difficult enough, but at this point, the soccer coach was only a couple feet away from grabbing me. With my remaining strength, I pulled the door just wide enough so I could squeeze through. I bolted up the stairs. I had no way of knowing how close I was to the surface, or how close I was to being pulled back into the darkness by one of the many people chasing after me. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. I was about to collapse at the thought of meeting the same fate as my sister, but I continued to run. The familiar sound of students conversing had awaited me as I reached the top of the staircase. It was passing time, but now it was the end of the school day. The hallways were crowded. I spotted my academic advisor closing a classroom door, holding my jacket and backpack, which I had previously left in the hallway before going down to the basement. I guess one of the hall monitors had seen it and given it to her. As I ran through the crowd, I snatched my belongings right out of her hands and didn't say a word. I ran for the front doors. It was still raining, and I was getting soaked. I found myself running slower. It felt as if I was sinking under the might of the dark clouds, but I fought through it and managed to reach my mom's car. "Honey, you're soaked. Why aren't you wearing your coat? Just drive!" I breathlessly cried out in a desperate pleas, yelling at my own mother out of fear. "I will, but just drive, please, Mom. Just drive." All right, but if you yell at me like that ever again, you're grounded." As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of the soccer coach standing just out the front doors of the school. Our eyes met, and he watched as I left the proximity of the school. From then on, there was a long, painful silence until we reached the house. As I stepped out of the car, the harsh rain had stopped, but thunder roared one last time, taunting me. Yet the clouds continued to assert a shadow over me. The sun was nowhere to be seen, and the wind said nothing. I nearly fell to my knees as I walked over to the front door of my house. I was that tired. I took a seat on the living room couch and told my mom about the basement. I told her about how the soccer coach lied to us. I told her about what was happening to my sister. I told her about what was going to happen to me. She gasped in horror, covered her mouth with one hand, and paused. I could tell that she was about to cry. "Jack." My mom's face was red, and she was tearing up now. "Yes, Mom? I'm calling the cops." There was a sternness in her voice. The clouds were nicer the next day. They were whiter, but they seemed to have blocked out the sun completely, at least for a while. I'd given the keychain to the police force who had stormed the school's basement, preparing to bust the underground trafficking ring. But when they got there, they found nothing. And they found no one. All of the rooms were empty. All of the lanterns were turned off. It looked as if there hadn't been anyone down there in months. On every surface and on every crevice, they found dust. Nevertheless, the police report was disappointing. However, they did find one artifact, a little girl's hair bow, which appeared to have been trampled on. They concluded that whoever was down there had fled shortly after I ran out of the building. I was an idiot. I diverted too much attention to myself, and because of that, my sister was gone. Perhaps forever. "Thank you, officer. Have a nice day." My dad stuttered as the officer left the house. There were tears forming in his eyes. He sat down next to my mother, who said nothing. Her cheeks were stained with the tears of the suffering, the tears of the broken-hearted, the tears of the lost one, and the tears of the forgotten ones. From across the room, I sulked down into the couch and held my sister's hair bow in my hands. The consequences of my mistakes were pushing me down. I was suffocating. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," I desperately stuttered in whispers. I took a glance at the window. The sun returned, perhaps just for a moment. Majestically, it brought warm rays of hope and promise onto the cold, hard ground. Perhaps it wanted to serve as a reminder to me that there is more to this story. Perhaps it wanted me to realize that this was not the end of my sister, and that I would see her again. But its light failed to reach me.